At 15, she loudly declared that she would marry the teacher. No one knew that behind his simplicity, he hid a fortune. The retired millionaire preferred to live in anonymity, but fate united the innocent promise with true love. What do you think will happen in this story? Comment and don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear in your life. Under the open sky of New Orleans, with the Louisiana breeze carrying the aroma of Cajun spices and the river's mist, Emma Carter felt for the first time that kind of certainty that not even books could explain. At 15, surrounded by the chatter of classmates in the courtyard of the Hemingway Cultural Institute, she raised her voice above the parallel conversations and declared, with the impetuousness typical of youth, "One day, I'm going to marry Professor Thomas Mitchell." The laughter didn't take long to emerge. Embarrassed glances multiplied among the teenagers. Emma, however, remained firm, her brown eyes reflecting the same determination she had inherited from her grandmother. For the others, it was nothing more than a typical teenage fantasy, perhaps inspired by some romance she had read in literature class. For Emma, it was a conviction as solid as the St. Louis Cathedral she observed daily from her classroom window. Thomas Mitchell wasn't just the literature professor who spoke about Hemingway and Fitzgerald with the familiarity of someone who knew their souls. He represented something beyond, an idea, a possibility of life. At 32, with always well-trimmed hair, discreet framed glasses, and a peculiar way of gesturing when reciting poetry, he transformed classes into almost mystical experiences, where each word carried the weight of an entire universe. "You're crazy, girl," whispered Danielle, her best friend since childhood in the Garden District. "He must be twice your age, and besides, they say he's dating a professor from Tulane." Emma merely smiled, keeping to herself what others couldn't see. It wasn't a matter of physical appearance, although Thomas was undeniably attractive with his tanned skin and contained smile. It was something deeper, the way he talked about love in literature, as if he had experienced all the pains and joys described by Whitman or Frost. The Hemingway Cultural Institute wasn't like other schools in New Orleans. Founded just over a decade ago, it stood out for its humanistic approach and welcoming environment, different from the traditional institutions of the Louisiana capital. Students had the freedom to develop their own projects, and arts occupied a central place in the curriculum. Emma had entered there thanks to a scholarship after winning a literary contest promoted by the New Orleans Cultural Foundation. In the hot afternoons when the sun began to set over Lake Pontchartrain, Emma remained beyond the scheduled hours, sitting under the centennial oak tree that dominated the school garden. There, between the pages of a navy blue-covered diary, she wrote, not just about Thomas, but about everything her teenage heart overflowed: poems, reflections, dreams, especially dreams. "You have talent with words," Thomas said once after reading an essay of hers about Jackson Square. "You managed to transform the historic stones into living witnesses. Keep writing." Those words, seemingly simple, had transformed into fuel for Emma. Each compliment, each look of approval, each quick conversation in the hallways was carefully stored in her memory and later transferred to her diary, like someone preserving relics. What no one knew, not even Danielle, who knew almost all her secrets, was that Emma wrote letters to Thomas, letters she never delivered, filled with confessions, literary analyses, and questions she didn't have the courage to ask in person. She kept them inside an old copy of The Great Gatsby, her favorite novel, as if F. Scott Fitzgerald himself were a silent accomplice to her secret. The Institute occupied a renovated old mansion in the French Quarter near the river. Its wide corridors, wooden windows, and stone staircases contrasted with the modernly equipped rooms. It was a place where past and present conversed without conflict, just as Emma's dreams dialogued with her reality. Lisa Greenwood, pedagogical coordinator of the Institute, observed with interest that dedicated student who always participated in literary discussions. A woman in her 40s, with curly hair always tied in an elaborate bun, Lisa was known for her sharp intelligence and the strategic smile that rarely reached her eyes. "Emma has a brilliant future in letters," she commented once to Thomas during a teachers' meeting. "But I worry about the way she watches you in class." Thomas adjusted his glasses, uncomfortable. "It's just intellectual admiration." Many teenagers go through this phase of idealizing their teacher. Lisa smiled enigmatically. Of course, intellectual admiration. What no one at the Institute could imagine is that Thomas Mitchell carried a history very different from the image of dedicated and modest teacher he presented. Before becoming an educator, he had created culturalplatform.com, a revolutionary site that democratized access to American literature for millions of people, especially in regions far from major centers. The startup had transformed into a national phenomenon and was sold for an amount that made him a millionaire before 30. Instead of ostentation or fame, Thomas chose anonymity. He invested his fortune in social projects that never bore his name and rebuilt his life as an educator. The Hemingway Cultural Institute was, in fact, funded by him, a fact known only to the administrative board, which respected his desire for secrecy. Every morning, Thomas arrived at the Institute, driving a simple car, wearing unpretentious clothes and carrying the same weathered leather bag. Nothing in his appearance suggested that, in an account in the Cayman Islands, there was a fortune capable of buying half the neighborhood where he taught. The literature classes advanced through the semester, and Emma immersed herself deeper into her world of romantic fantasies. In her daydreams, she imagined deep conversations with Thomas about Faulkner while walking along the riverfront, or debates about the work of Sylvia Plath during coffee at a French Quarter cafe. Reality, however, was about to abruptly interrupt her dreams. In the first week of December, during the organization of the year-end celebration, Emma overheard a conversation between two teachers in the art room. "Thomas finally proposed to Sarah," one of them commented, adjusting the decorative banners. "It seems they'll be moving to New York next semester. She got a position as a visiting professor at Columbia." Emma's world collapsed in silence. The colorful banners, the animated voices of colleagues, the smell of fresh paint, everything seemed to vanish like a dream, brusquely interrupted. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the brushes she was using to finish a holiday card. That same week, her father announced that he had been transferred to Boston. The family would move after the year-end holidays. Emma received the news with a calmness that surprised everyone. No one perceived that, inside, something was slowly breaking. On the eve of her departure, during the end-of-year celebration, Emma remained distant from the celebrations. She waited for the moment when the teacher's room would be empty, and with her heart beating irregularly, slipped a small envelope under the door of Thomas's room. Inside, there was just one phrase, written in her careful handwriting on jasmine-scented paper: "True love is worth the wait." Without looking back, Emma Carter left the Hemingway Cultural Institute, taking with her teenage dreams and leaving behind, forgotten in the haste of farewell, her navy blue-covered diary inside a drawer of the old library cabinet. The next morning, when the New Orleans sun was still rising over the river, the Carter family departed towards Boston, leaving behind the flavor of beignets, the sound of jazz, and a youthful love that Emma swore to herself never to forget. In the narrow streets of Jackson Square, where New Orleans' colonial past was, preserved among colorful facades and winding alleys, Thomas Mitchell walked pensively. The words written in the small scented note had disturbed him more than he would like to admit. "True love is worth the wait." The phrase, seemingly simple, carried a weight that he recognized well, that of youth that confuses admiration with love that transforms teachers into Romanesque heroes. Thomas kept the note in his copy of As I Lay Dying as a permanent bookmark. He didn't know who had written it, although he suspected. He had noticed Emma's glances during classes, the way she absorbed his every word, as if they were drops of water in the desert. But she was just a 15-year-old girl, he repeated to himself, a talented student with a promising future in literature. The mansion that served as his residence in the uptown neighborhood revealed little about his true financial condition. It was comfortable, yes, but without ostentation, dark wooden furniture, walls decorated with regional art, a veranda that offered a view of the distant river. Only his personal office, filled with rare first editions and carefully organized documents, betrayed his love for what money could really buy: knowledge. "Are you thinking about the move to New York?" asked Sarah, entering the office with 2 cups of coffee. Sarah Coleman, professor of art history at Tulane University, had been his fiancée for almost a year. Tall, fair-skinned, with black hair always impeccably tied back, she had the discreet elegance that matched Thomas's reserved personality. "I'm thinking about the Institute," he replied, accepting the coffee. "I wonder if I did the right thing in creating that place." Sarah sat in the armchair across from him. "You transformed the lives of hundreds of young people, especially those from low-income backgrounds. How could that not be the right thing?" Thomas sighed. "It's not the purpose that I question, but the method. Perhaps I should have been more transparent about my involvement." The story of Thomas Mitchell had begun far from there, in the suburbs of Chicago. Son of a primary school teacher and a small merchant, he had grown up among borrowed books and dreams larger than his backyard. In adolescence, he had developed a digital system that facilitated access to works in the public domain, specially adapted for low-cost cell phones, an essential tool in a country where many had smartphones even before having a computer. What had begun as a college project transformed into culturalplatform.com, revolutionizing access to American literature. In just 5 years, the startup attracted the attention of international investors and was acquired by a media conglomerate for a value that made headlines in financial newspapers. Suddenly, at 27, Thomas Mitchell found himself a millionaire. Money, however, had never been his goal. Public recognition suffocated him. The interviews, invitations to lectures, tributes, all of that seemed disconnected from the original purpose of his work, to democratize knowledge. It was then that he made a radical decision. He hired a discreet team of asset managers, divided his fortune between socially responsible investment funds and anonymous cultural projects, and disappeared from the media radar. With a degree in literature, he decided to return to his roots. He would be a teacher. The Hemingway Cultural Institute was born from this impulse. With the help of lawyers specialized in philanthropy, Thomas structured the school as a non-profit foundation, financed by a group of businessmen concerned with education, in reality himself, through a complex network of shell companies. "Think anonymity allowed me to be who I really am," Thomas commented, while watching the New Orleans sunset through the window. "To be recognized for what I do in the classroom, not for the money I have." Sarah studied him with her perceptive eyes. "But isn't that exactly what your money is doing? Allowing you to build a reputation as an idealistic educator, when in reality you have a financial cushion that most teachers will never have?" The question hit Thomas like an unexpected blow. Sarah had always had the gift of exposing the contradictions he preferred to ignore. It was one of the reasons he loved her, or believed he loved her. "Maybe you're right," he conceded after a long silence. "Maybe there is a fundamental hypocrisy in what I do." The months preceding the move to New York were marked by growing restlessness. Thomas felt divided between his commitment to Sarah, a secure, intellectually stimulating, socially appropriate relationship, and an inexplicable feeling of incompleteness. The engagement had been announced during a dinner with university colleagues. The ring, chosen with the help of his financial manager, was elegant without being ostentatious. Everyone congratulated the couple. Everyone commented on how they formed a perfect partnership. Everyone except Thomas's heart, which remained strangely quiet. The week before the scheduled move, Sarah received an unexpected invitation. An American university was offering her the opportunity to coordinate a Latin American studies program for 2 years. It was the kind of proposal that comes once in a lifetime. "You could come with me," she suggested, during a candlelit dinner at the New Orleans Museum of Art restaurant. "I'm sure you would find work there. Your contacts in the publishing industry—" "My contact," Thomas interrupted her with a bitter smile. "Contacts I built as a businessman, not as a teacher. It's not that identity I want to carry forward." The discussion that followed was civilized, as suited 2 intellectuals, but definitive. Sarah left for the United States 2 weeks later, leaving behind an engagement ring and the unfulfilled promise of a future together. Thomas decided to remain in New Orleans. The Hemingway Cultural Institute had become more than a project. It was his life purpose. He assumed the position of academic director, keeping some literature classes that connected him directly to the students. The years passed with the cadence typical of the Louisiana capital, neither too fast like Chicago nor too slow like the small towns in the interior. Thomas established a comfortable routine between the institute, his home in Uptown, and occasional discreet trips to monitor his investments. Lisa Greenwood, who had remained as pedagogical coordinator, became his main ally in the administration of the school. Efficient and discreet, she knew Thomas's financial secret and managed the institution's day-to-day with unquestionable competence. "We received the resume of a young teacher that I think will interest you," Lisa commented, entering his office. One February afternoon, 5 years after Sarah's departure. Graduated with honors from Boston University, masters in American literature, some interesting publications on Louisiana modernism. Thomas took the resume without much interest. He was used to trusting Lisa's choices for the faculty. "She's from Boston?" he asked, noting the university where the candidate had graduated. "Actually, she's from New Orleans, lived in Boston for a few years but is returning to New Orleans." When Thomas finally read the name at the top of the document, he felt a strange mixture of surprise and something he couldn't name. Emma Carter, the girl with the attentive gaze and perceptive questions, had become a woman, and apparently followed the path of literature, as he had predicted. "Do you know her?" asked Lisa, noticing his reaction. "She was my student many years ago," he replied, trying to maintain a neutral tone. "Very talented." "Great. Then you won't see any problem with her taking over the American literature classes for the sophomore year? We need to fill Professor Mark's position urgently." Thomas hesitated for just a second before nodding. "No problem. If her resume is as good as you say, she'll be an excellent addition to the institute." That night, alone in his office, Thomas pulled from a locked drawer the yellowed envelope. "True love is worth the wait." The words, written with the delicate calligraphy of a teenager, now seemed to contain a meaning he hadn't perceived before. Meanwhile, in a temporary apartment near the Garden District, Emma Carter unpacked the last boxes of her move from Boston. Among books, clothes, and small souvenirs from her life in the Northeast, she carefully stored a folder with newspaper clippings and printouts of articles about the Hemingway Cultural Institute and its mysterious academic director. At 25, Emma was no longer the dreamy girl who had left New Orleans a decade ago. She had graduated with distinction, published academic articles, built a reputation as a promising researcher. Her romantic relationships had been brief and unsatisfying. No man seemed to correspond to the ideal she had cultivated since adolescence. The return to New Orleans hadn't been planned. The position at the Institute appeared in a bulletin of academic opportunities, and something inside her, intuition, destiny, or simple curiosity, impelled her to send her resume. When she received the email from Lisa Greenwood scheduling an interview, she felt her heart accelerate as hadn't happened in years. Emma knew that Thomas Mitchell still directed the Institute. She knew that she would probably encounter him in the corridors, in pedagogical meetings, in school events. What she didn't know was if he would recognize her, if he would remember the girl who had once declared she would marry him. The idea made her smile with a mixture of embarrassment and expectation. Observing the nocturnal landscape of New Orleans from her apartment window, Emma reflected on the paths that brought her back. 10 years had passed. She was no longer a love-struck teenager, but a well-educated woman, with clear objectives and a career in construction. Still, she couldn't deny that something of the old flame remained lit, like a promise made long ago that still awaited fulfillment. The Hemingway Cultural Institute maintained the same colonial facade that Emma kept in memory, with its ochre-toned walls and wide wooden windows. However, upon crossing the main gate that March morning, she noticed small changes that betrayed the passage of time. The more elaborate garden, a new wing of rooms to the right, solar panels discreetly installed on the roof. Dressed in a simple Navy blue dress and low sandals, Emma carried a folder with her class materials and the nervousness of one returning to a place loaded with meanings. Her curly hair, once always tied in braids, now fell loose around her shoulders, framing a face that had matured without losing the vivacity in the eyes. Emma Carter, a female voice called her in the main hall. I'm Faith, assistant to the coordination. Dr. Lisa is waiting for you to present the facilities before your first class. Faith, a young woman with an efficient appearance and clipboard in hand, led Emma through the institute's corridors. Groups of teenagers passed by, chatting animatedly, some casting curious glances at the new teacher. In the teacher's room, she was introduced to colleagues who smiled cordially before returning to their tasks. The institute has grown quite a bit in recent years, explained Faith, while they walked towards the coordination office. Now we have well-equipped science laboratories, a digital library, and partnerships with international universities. Professor Mitchell has a vision for the future. The name made Emma's heart skip a beat, but she maintained a neutral expression. Impressive. And does the humanistic approach continue to be the differentiating factor? Absolutely. Professor Mitchell insists that technology without humanity is empty. That's why we maintain arts and literature as pillars of the curriculum, even with all this modernization. The coordination door opened before they arrived, and Lisa Greenwood emerged, impeccable in her grey suit and medium heels. Her hair, now with some grey strands, remained tied in the same elaborate bun that Emma remembered. Emma, what a pleasure to receive you back, said Lisa, extending her hand with a smile that didn't completely reach her eyes. You've transformed into a remarkable young woman, exactly as we predicted when you were our student. Emma accepted the greeting, feeling something indefinable in the coordinator's tone. It's a pleasure to return, Dr. Greenwood. The institute seems even more impressive than I remembered. Fruit of much work and dedication, replied Lisa, indicating the door to her office. Shall we talk about your classes? Professor Mitchell should join us in a few minutes. He makes a point of personally meeting all new teachers. Lisa's office reflected her personality, organized, elegant, and slightly intimidating. Diplomas and certificates adorned the walls, along with photographs of the coordinator beside important figures in American education. On her desk, a particular photo caught Emma's attention. Lisa and Thomas at some formal event, smiling side by side. You seem close, commented Emma, indicating the photograph with a discreet gesture. Lisa adjusted the image with careful fingers. We've worked together for many years. Professor Mitchell values loyalty above all. Her tone contained a possessive nuance that didn't go unnoticed. The conversation proceeded with practical orientations about the classes Emma would assume, evaluation methodology, and ongoing projects. Lisa spoke with professional precision, but Emma perceived a subtext in her words, as if she were being constantly evaluated beyond the academic scope. The door opened without warning, and Emma felt the air leave her lungs momentarily. Thomas, Mitchell entered with the same tranquil presence she remembered, although time had left subtle marks. Some grey hairs at the temples, lines of expression around the eyes, an air of wisdom that only the years confer. The same discreet framed glasses, the same way of carrying books close to his chest. Sorry for the delay, he said, closing the door. I had to resolve a situation with the junior class. His voice remained the same, deep, melodious, capable of transforming a simple phrase into something memorable. When his eyes finally met Emma's, there was a moment of recognition that seemed to suspend time. A silence loaded with untold memories of divergent paths that now converged again. Emma, he finally said with a contained smile, welcome back to the Institute. Professor Mitchell, she responded, mentally thanking the hour she had spent rehearsing this moment, controlling each nuance of her voice to sound professional. It's a pleasure to see you again. Lisa observed the exchange with attentive eyes, like a predator studying its prey. Emma was one of our most brilliant students, she commented, breaking the tension of the moment. Now she returns as a promising academic. Thomas nodded, still keeping his gaze fixed on Emma. I remember, well, Your analyses of Fitzgerald were extraordinary, even for a teenager. You were always generous in your compliments, replied Emma, sustaining the gaze with a confidence she didn't possess 10 years ago. The meeting continued with discussions about the curricular program and the Institute's expectations. Thomas spoke with passion about contemporary American literature, a field that Emma had explored in her master's dissertation. The conversation flowed with surprising naturalness, as if the years of separation hadn't existed. Your article on the influence of jazz on the work of F. Scott Fitzgerald was remarkable, commented Thomas, referring to a recent publication by Emma. I would love to discuss some of your ideas at another time if you're willing. Before Emma could respond, Lisa intervened smoothly. Thomas, we shouldn't overload our new teacher on her first day. I'm sure there will be time for academic discussions in the future. The rest of the morning transpired in a whirlwind of activities. Emma met her classrooms, familiarized herself with the Institute's digital system, and met with other teachers during the break. In her first class with curious sophomores, she felt strangely at ease, as if she had returned to a place that had always been hers. It was only at the end of the day, when the Institute was already emptying, that Emma found a moment of solitude in the library. The space had been completely renovated. Modern shelves, study tables equipped with outlets, a digital cataloging system. Still, the smell of books remained the same, comforting and familiar. Some things never change, said a voice behind her. Emma turned to find Thomas standing at the entrance to the library, his hands in the pockets of his dress pants, observing her with an expression she couldn't completely decipher. Professor Mitchell, she said, closing the book she was browsing. I thought everyone had already left. Please, call me Thomas. We're colleagues now. He walked up to her, maintaining a respectful distance. And I have the habit of staying late. This place has a different energy when it's empty. Emma nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. I used to feel the same when I was a student. Sometimes I would stay studying here until Miss Betty, the librarian, practically expelled me. Miss Betty retired 2 years ago, commented Thomas with a nostalgic smile. But before that, she continued expelling tardy students until her last day. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable, but loaded with unspoken words. Emma could feel the weight of the years, of the choices, of the paths they had traveled separately. You did an excellent job today, Thomas finally said. The students are already talking about the new teacher who discusses Sylvia Plath as if she had known her personally. Emma laughed. I just try to make them realize that literature isn't something distant, Dusty, that these authors spoke about issues that remain relevant. Exactly as I tried to teach you, he replied with a sparkle, in his eyes that made Emma's heart race. Before she could respond, Thomas's cell phone vibrated. He consulted it quickly, frowning. I need to go. We have a situation with the administrative board. Putting away the device, he hesitated for a moment. I'm glad you're back, Emma. New Orleans gained different colors with your return. After his departure, Emma remained in the library for a few more minutes, absorbing the meaning of that reunion. She was no longer the girl who had sworn to marry the literature professor. She was a well-educated woman, a competent professional who returned by her own merit. And yet something of the old connection remained there, pulsing beneath the surface of social and professional conventions. When leaving the Institute, already under the orange sky of the New Orleans late afternoon, Emma didn't notice the gaze that followed her from the coordination window. Lisa Greenwood observed her departure with an indecipherable expression, the cell phone in hand, dialing a number she knew well. Rodrigo, it's Lisa. I need you to investigate someone for me. Emma, Carter, our new literature teacher. I want to know everything about her last 10 years in Boston, especially relationships, university connections, and anything that might be problematic for the Institute. Meanwhile, in her apartment in the Garden District, Emma opened a laptop and searched the internet about the Hemingway Cultural Institute. The reports mentioned its academic excellence, innovative approach, and the mysterious group of investors who generously funded it. Nowhere did Thomas Mitchell's name appear as more than academic director and professor. Who are you really, Thomas? murmured Emma to herself, as the sun set over Lake Pontchartrain, tinting the sky with shades of red and gold that resembled promises made long ago. That same night, in his home in Uptown, Thomas opened a locked drawer in his office. Among important documents and some old photographs, there was a small envelope yellowed by time, containing a scented note he had never had the courage to discard. "True love is worth the wait." The words written 10 years before now seemed a portent that finally began to materialize. Emma's first weeks at the Institute flowed with the cadence typical of New Orleans, neither hurried like in the metropolises of the Northeast, nor slow like in interior towns. The classes came to life in her hands, transforming American literature from a school subject into a living experience. Her students observed her with that peculiar mixture of respect and curiosity that teenagers reserve for teachers who manage to cross the barrier of youthful indifference. In pedagogical meetings, Emma noticed Thomas's frequent gaze in her direction, always attentive to her contributions. They were brief, professional glances, but loaded with something that she couldn't completely name. Something between recognition and discovery, like someone who rediscovers a book read long ago and perceives layers of meaning previously unnoticed. Lisa Greenwood, on the other hand, maintained a vigilance that Emma was beginning to consider excessive. The coordinator appeared unexpectedly during her classes, requested detailed reports about applied methodologies, subtly questioned her pedagogical choices. "Dr. Greenwood seems to have a special interest in you," commented Megan, the history teacher, and the first to establish a genuine friendship with Emma. They were at the small cafe near the Institute, sharing a break between classes. "I've never seen her so attentive to a teacher's adaptation." Emma thoughtfully stirred the sugar in her coffee. "Maybe it's because I was a student here. She probably wants to ensure that I maintain the Institute's standards." Megan raised an eyebrow, a gesture she made when diplomatically disagreeing. "Or maybe it's because you and Thomas seem to have a natural harmony in meetings. Lisa has always been territorial regarding him." "Territorial? Do they have a relationship?" "Not officially, but there have been rumors for years. She clearly has feelings for him, although Thomas keeps everything strictly professional." Megan lowered her voice. "They say she was completely different before his ex-fiancée left. After that, she assumed this role of guardian of the Institute, and of him by extension." The conversation was interrupted by the alarm on Emma's cell phone, reminding her of the next class. As they returned to the Institute, she absorbed the information, fitting it like a new piece in the puzzle that was Thomas Mitchell. That afternoon, after the classes ended, Emma headed to the pedagogical resources room to fetch audiovisual material. The room, rarely used outside of planning hours, housed not only modern equipment, but also old cabinets with physical files, a testimony to the technological transition the Institute was undergoing. While searching among shelves for a documentary on American modernism, Emma noticed a dark wood cabinet in the farthest corner. Different from the other furniture, this one seemed older, with delicate carvings on the doors and an ornate lock. For some reason, the furniture seemed familiar. "It's the old library cabinet," said a voice behind her, making her startle. Betty, the oldest employee of the Institute, smiled with her kind eyes. "When they renovated the library, they didn't want to throw it away. It's more than 100 years old, made by Louisiana craftsmen." Emma approached the furniture, feeling a strange connection with the object. "Is it locked?" No, just stuck with time. We keep old materials there, things that no one uses anymore but have historical value." Betty approached, gently pulling one of the doors that opened with a nostalgic creak. "See? Old notebooks, outdated maps, even some student works that the teachers considered exceptional." Emma's heart accelerated inexplicably. "Student works?" "Yes, a tradition of Professor Mitchell's. He keeps essays, poems, compositions that he considers extraordinary. He says it's important to preserve the evolution of young people's thinking." With a grateful smile, Emma dismissed Betty's help, promising to organize the cabinet a bit while looking for her material. When she was alone, she began to explore the shelves with growing curiosity. In the third drawer, She found a simple cardboard box, identified only with the letters SA, Student Archive, she presumed. Inside the box, among yellowed works and old photographs of graduated classes, something immediately caught her eye: a navy blue covered notebook. Her diary, that same one she had inadvertently abandoned 10 years ago in the haste of her departure to Boston. With trembling hands, Emma removed the object from the box. The notebook was exactly as she had left it. The slightly faded cover, a ribbon bookmark hanging out, her name written in silver pen in the lower right corner. Opening it, she found her own teenage calligraphy, confessions and dreams captured in blue ink. Today, Professor Thomas recited Robert Frost and seemed to look directly at me. I felt as if the words, "the road not taken," were a private message. Emma quickly closed the diary, her face warming with retrospective embarrassment. The teenage feelings, so intense and absolute, now seemed simultaneously naive and true. It was like finding an earlier version of herself, preserved in the amber of time. Without thinking twice, Emma put the diary in her purse. It was hers, after all, a fragment of her history that deserved to be rescued, even if only to be properly stored. What Emma didn't know, as she left the resource room with the diary safely stored, was that that simple act would trigger a series of events that would transform the Institute and her life. The next morning, an unusual agitation took over the corridors. Students gathered in small groups, whispering and pointing discreetly at the main mural. Emma approached, curious, only to feel her blood freeze in her veins. Posted on the mural, on colored paper and with elaborate calligraphy, was a transcription of an excerpt from her diary. Sometimes, when he explains about romanticism, I imagine how it would feel to have his hands in mine while we walk along the riverfront. Does he notice how my heart races when our gazes meet during class? Yesterday I dreamed that he called me by name, not as a teacher calls a student, but as a man calls the woman he admires. The text bore no signature, but anyone who knew the context could infer that it was about a student in love with a teacher. Emma felt her stomach turn. How was that possible? The diary had been in her purse all night. Tearing the paper from the mural with trembling hands, Emma quickly headed to the teacher's room, only to find a similar scene. Another excerpt, different from the first, was affixed to the bulletin board. Today he mentioned that his favorite poet is Whitman. I spent the whole afternoon in the library repeatedly reading Leaves of Grass, trying to understand what in those verses touches him so deeply. I want to know every corner of his mind, every reference that illuminates his eyes when he speaks. Seems like we have a little Romeo and Juliet among us, commented Paul, the math teacher, while removing the paper. Teenagers and their dramatic passions. I bet it's some junior year student. Emma felt her face burn. This is inappropriate. Someone should investigate who's doing this. I've already informed the coordination, replied Paul, without noticing her discomfort. Although between us, I think there's something more concerning happening than romantic notes. Did you hear about the business group interested in the Institute's land? The question caught Emma by surprise, momentarily diverting her from her personal crisis. What business group? Northeast Development Consortium. They're planning a gigantic commercial center in this area. They offered a fortune for the property. Paul lowered his voice. They say some members of the administrative board are considering the proposal. After all, the Institute could be transferred to more modern installations with double the space. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of other teachers, and Emma took advantage of the distraction to escape towards her classroom. Throughout the day, she discovered that the excerpts from her diary had been spread across various points of the Institute, in bathrooms, in the cafeteria, in corridors. Someone had made copies and distributed them strategically, ensuring maximum exposure. During the break, Emma noticed the gazes and whispers of students, some muffled laughter, some expressions of empathy. The situation became unbearable by the minute. "Professor Emma?" Lisa Greenwood's voice interrupted her thoughts. The coordinator was standing at her classroom door, expression impassive. "Can we talk in my office, please?" The path to the coordination seemed endless. Emma felt as if she were walking through a transparent corridor, exposed to all gazes. In the meticulously organized office, Lisa indicated a chair to her before sitting in her own leather armchair. "I imagine you've already seen the texts that have been spread throughout the school," began Lisa, joining her fingertips in a calculated gesture. "A rather unpleasant situation." "Completely inappropriate," agreed Emma, keeping her voice firm despite the internal turmoil. "Someone is invading a student's privacy." Lisa tilted her head slightly, studying her with perceptive eyes. "A student? Interesting that you automatically assume that." The tone caused a shiver in Emma. "Well, by the nature of the content," interrupted Lisa smoothly, "it seems to be someone who nurtures inappropriate feelings for a teacher, someone who, perhaps, has recently returned to the institute." The silence that followed was as dense as Louisiana humidity. Emma felt the accusation hovering in the air, not verbalized but clearly present. "Dr. Greenwood, if you're insinuating—" "I'm not insinuating anything, Professor Carter." Lisa opened a drawer and placed a sheet of paper on the desk. Another excerpt from her diary. "I'm just noting curious similarities between these anonymous texts and certain attitudes I've observed since your arrival." Emma breathed deeply, gathering all the composure she could. "These texts were stolen from a personal diary that I kept when I was a teenager. I found it yesterday by chance in the pedagogical resources room. Someone must have removed it from my purse during the night." Lisa raised an eyebrow. "A teenage diary kept how long ago exactly?" 10 years, when I was a student at this institute." A gleam of satisfaction passed through the coordinator's eyes. "Then you're confirming that these feelings for a teacher, presumably Professor Mitchell, were yours?" Emma felt cornered. Admitting would be exposing herself completely. Denying would be transparently lying. They were feelings of a teenager. "Dr. Greenwood, every student at some point idealizes a teacher. That remained in the past, where it should stay. Yet you chose to return precisely to this institution, among so many options available to someone with your resume." Lisa stood up, walking slowly around the room. "And now these texts appear, coincidentally, right after your arrival." "Are you accusing me of something, Dr. Greenwood?" Emma also stood, refusing to remain in a position of physical inferiority. "I am merely concerned with the institute's reputation," replied Lisa with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Rumors are like tides, Professor Carter. Once started, they can hardly be contained, especially rumors about favoritism in the hiring of young and attractive teachers, with a history of admiration for their superiors." The threat was clear. Emma felt anger replace the initial fear. "I was hired for my academic qualification and professional experience, Dr. Greenwood. My past as a student and my teenage feelings have no relevance to my current position." "Naturally," agreed Lisa with false cordiality. "I'm sure the administrative board will think the same when this situation comes to their knowledge, or when the local press discovers that the new star teacher of the institute was, in fact, an old student, obsessed with the now director." Before Emma could respond, the office door opened without warning. Thomas entered, serious expression, holding one of the colored papers in his hand. "Lisa, we need to talk about these texts that are being—" He interrupted himself upon seeing Emma, immediately perceiving the tension in the room. "Sorry, I didn't know you were in a meeting." "Actually, your arrival is opportune, Thomas," said Lisa, with a calculated smile. "We were just discussing the origin of these interesting literary fragments that appeared throughout the school." Thomas's gaze moved between the two women, capturing the nuances of the situation. His eyes met Emma's briefly, a gaze loaded with unformulated questions. "And have you reached any conclusion?" he asked, maintaining a neutral tone. "Professor Carter has a fascinating theory about this," replied Lisa, before Emma could speak. "Perhaps she should share it with you, in private." With these words, Lisa headed to the door. "I'll leave you alone to discuss this delicate matter. After all, it seems to be something personal." The click of the door closing behind her sounded like a presage of storm. The silence in Lisa's office was as dense as the air before a tropical storm. Emma remained standing, her hands gripping the strap of her purse with enough force to leave her knuckles white. Thomas closed his eyes for a moment, as if organizing scattered thoughts before finally breaking it. "You know what these texts are, don't you?" he asked, his calm voice contrasting with the palpable tension of the environment. Emma nodded slowly. "They are excerpts from my teenage diary. I found it yesterday in the resources room, in the old library cabinet. Someone must have taken it from my purse during the night." Thomas showed no surprise, only a resignation that intrigued her. "I feared something like this," he confessed, passing his hand through his hair, slightly gray at the temples. "Sit down, please. This conversation is 10 years overdue." Emma obeyed, observing him with curiosity as he walked to the window. Outside, the New Orleans sky was beginning to darken with rain clouds approaching the horizon, a perfect reflection of the atmosphere inside the office. "I knew it was yours," Thomas finally said, turning to face her. "The diary. I found it in the library a few days after your departure to Boston. I immediately recognized your handwriting." The revelation hit Emma like an unexpected wave. "You read it?" "Not on purpose at first. I opened it to identify the owner and recognized your handwriting. But later," he hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Later, yes, I read some pages. Enough to understand your feelings. Enough to keep the diary safe where no one else could find it. Then how did it end up in the resources room cabinet? I put it there when we renovated the library about 2 years ago. That cabinet is rarely used, and I thought it would be secure until I could, well, return it to you someday, perhaps." Emma tried to process the information. Her teenage diary had been in Thomas's hands all this time. He knew her most intimate feelings, her youthful fantasies, her passionate declarations. "Why didn't you destroy it?" she asked, genuinely curious. "It would have been simpler." Thomas smiled slightly, the first real smile since entering the room. Destroying something so sincere would be unforgivable. Your writing, even at 15, had a moving honesty. Destroying it would be like burning a poem for being too true. The words touched Emma deeply, but a more urgent question occupied her thoughts. If it had been kept for so long, how did these excerpts appear now, spread throughout the school? "That," replied Thomas, finally sitting across from her, "is what we need to discover. Someone is trying to create a compromising situation. The question is, who would have interest in this?" The name of Lisa Greenwood hung in the air between them, not pronounced, but clearly present. "There is another, more immediate question," continued Thomas. "How to deal with the rumors that have already begun to circulate. Teenagers are perceptive observers. Some have already made the connection between the anonymous texts and the fact that you were a student here." Emma felt her face burn. The idea that her students might be discussing her teenage feelings was mortifying. "This could compromise my authority in the classroom." "It could, unless—" Thomas seemed to hesitate, considering something risky. "Unless—" "What?" "Unless we face this openly, not with explanations or excuses, but with professional dignity. Continue teaching as if nothing had happened. Any demonstration of shame or guilt will be interpreted as confirmation of something inappropriate." Emma reflected on the suggestion. It was sensible, although difficult. "What about Lisa? She clearly has her suspicions." "Lisa," Thomas sighed deeply. "It's a complicated story. She was essential for the Institute for years, but recently I've noticed changes in her behavior. A rigidity, a possessiveness in relation to work, and to me. Megan mentioned that Lisa has feelings for you. Feelings that I never encouraged," Thomas quickly clarified. "Our relationship has always been strictly professional, at least on my part, but I suspect she interpreted my professional trust as something more." The conversation was interrupted by firm knocks on the door. Without waiting for an answer, Betty, the oldest employee of the Institute, entered hurriedly. "Professor Mitchell, sorry to interrupt, but the administrative board is meeting in the conference room. Mr. Marcus Foster is present and insists on your immediate presence." Thomas frowned. "Marcus Foster, the representative of Northeast Consortium?" "Yes, sir. It seems that a formal offer is being presented to purchase the Institute's land." Emma observed the transformation in Thomas's countenance, a mixture of concern and determination, replacing the personal expression of moments before. "I need to go," he said, standing up. "But this conversation isn't over, Emma. Please, wait. In my room. There's more you need to know." After Thomas's departure, Emma remained in Lisa's office for a few minutes, trying to organize her thoughts. The diary situation was embarrassing, certainly, but not devastating. Teenagers have intense passions. Teachers know this. The real problem was how Lisa could use this against her. Deciding that she wouldn't wait passively, Emma headed to the conference room. She wouldn't enter, certainly, but could at least try to understand the gravity of the situation with the business consortium. The corridor leading to the conference room was deserted, allowing Emma to approach discreetly. The door wasn't completely closed, and excited voices escaped through the crack. $6 million is a more than generous offer for the land, said a male voice that Emma supposed was Marcus Foster's. The institute could be relocated to modern facilities with double the current space. "This building has historical and sentimental value," replied Thomas, his voice firm. "It's not for sale at any price." "With all due respect, Professor Mitchell," intervened another voice. One of the board members, Emma presumed. "The decision doesn't rest solely with the academic director. The board has a fiduciary responsibility to consider advantageous offers." "Exactly," agreed Marcus Foster. "And to be frank, the Institute's financial situation doesn't seem the most solid. The reports indicate growing deficits in the last quarters." Emma frowned, confused. From what she knew, the Institute was in excellent financial condition, with scholarships being offered and state-of-the-art equipment being regularly acquired. "The reports are incorrect," declared Thomas, with surprising firmness, "and I can prove it." "Even if they are," replied a board member, "we know that the Institute depends on donations from an anonymous group of businessmen, donations that could cease at any moment, leaving us in a vulnerable situation." A silence followed this declaration. Emma could imagine Thomas pondering his next move, as in a particularly tense chess match. "Gentlemen," he finally said, his voice lower but still audible, "there's something I need to clarify. Something that only 3 people in this institution know until now." Emma moved closer to the door, feeling that she was about to witness a significant revelation. "There is no anonymous group of businessmen funding the Institute," continued Thomas. "There is only one person, me." The exclamations of surprise inside the room were muffled by Emma's own stupefaction. She covered her mouth with her hand, trying to process what she had just heard. "What are you saying, Mitchell?" someone asked, incredulous. "I'm saying that I founded the Hemingway Cultural Institute with my own resources 12 years ago. Each renovation, each scholarship, each piece of equipment was directly financed by me through a complex legal structure designed to maintain my anonymity. But how? Where would such resources come from? Before becoming an educator, I was a businessman. I created culturalplatform.com, which revolutionized digital access to American literature. When I sold it, I became financially independent. I chose to invest my fortune in the creation of this institute, not as an act of charity, but as a life purpose. The silence that followed was dense, loaded with implications. Emma backed up a few steps, feeling that she had witnessed something that would completely transform her understanding about Thomas Mitchell. "This changes everything," Marcus Foster finally said. "If what you say is true, then the Institute is not for sale," Thomas firmly concluded. "It never was. The land, the building, everything belongs to the Mitchell Cultural Foundation, of which I am the sole maintainer. The administrative board has a consultative function, not deliberative, according to the original statutes." Emma moved away from the door, walking quickly towards Thomas's room. Her mind worked frantically, connecting dots that previously seemed disconnected. The modest car, the simple clothes, the absolute dedication to the Institute, it all made sense now. Thomas wasn't just a professor passionate about literature. He was a millionaire who had chosen anonymity to dedicate himself to a cause he believed in. In Thomas's room, Emma waited, trying to absorb all the revelations of that extraordinary day. When the door finally opened, almost an hour later, Thomas looked exhausted but strangely relieved. "You heard, didn't you?" he asked without preambles. Emma saw no reason to lie. "Yes, I was in the corridor." Thomas nodded as if already expecting that. "Then you know who I really am." "I know you're the founder and maintainer of the Institute. That you created culturalplatform.com, that you're apparently much richer than you appear." A tired smile appeared on Thomas's face. "The last part was never important to me. Money was just a means to create something meaningful." "Why this secret? Why hide this from everyone?" Thomas sat heavily in his chair, inviting Emma to do the same with a gesture. "Because I wanted to be judged for what I do, not for what I have. As a teacher, as an educator, as a human being. Money distorts people's perception." Emma understood immediately. How would people judge your classes, your dedication, knowing that you didn't need the salary? How would the other teachers feel working alongside someone who could buy the entire building? Exactly. I preferred to build my identity through my daily actions, not my bank account. A distant thunder announced the approach of the Louisiana storm. The rain began to fall, rhythmically beating against the old windows, creating an appropriate soundtrack for the revelations of that afternoon. "Now that the board knows, the news will spread," commented Emma. "Your secret is over." "Yes," agreed Thomas with a resigned sigh, "but it was inevitable. The Northeast Consortium was willing to use all means to acquire this land. They thoroughly investigated the Institute's financial structure and began to pressure board members. It was either reveal the truth or risk losing everything we've built here." "And how do things stand now?" "Complex." Thomas stood, walking to the window to observe the rain. "The consortium has temporarily retreated, but the press will soon discover. Tomorrow, I'll probably be the mysterious businessman who played teacher for a decade, not the educator I always wanted to be." The vulnerability in his voice touched Emma deeply. This man, whom she had first admired as an idealistic teenager, and now as a conscious adult, was facing the collapse of the identity he had carefully constructed. "What do you intend to do?" Thomas turned to face her, the light of the storm creating shadows on his face. "I don't know, maybe it's time to accept that some masks can't be maintained forever." At that moment, Emma's cell phone vibrated with a message. It was from Megan. "Urgent news. Lisa is spreading rumors about you and Thomas. Says your hiring was personal favoritism due to a previous relationship. Several teachers are already commenting." Emma showed the message to Thomas, who read it with a grave expression. "This is just the beginning," he said. "Lisa will feel betrayed by me not having shared my secret with her after so many years. She'll use anything to discredit people close to me, especially you." "Why especially me?" Thomas hesitated, as if considering how much to reveal. "Because Lisa found your note, the one you left before leaving for Boston. True love is worth the wait. She saw it in my book years ago and asked about it. I said it was just a quote I appreciated, but I think she always suspected." "And was it?" asked Emma, feeling her heart accelerate. "Just a quote you appreciated." There, gazes met, and for a moment time seemed to suspend between them. All the shared history, the years of separation, the paths they had traveled to reach that precise moment, everything seemed to converge in that gaze. "No," Thomas finally replied. "It was much more than that. It was a promise that I didn't have the courage to recognize at the time. A promise that perhaps has waited 10 years to be fulfilled." The confession hung between them, as real as the storm that now fell mercilessly over New Orleans. Before Emma could respond, urgent knocks on the door interrupted the moment. It was Betty again, her normally calm face now marked by genuine concern. "Professor, the press is already at the gates. Someone leaked the information about you being the true owner of the Institute, and there's more. Posters with excerpts from Professor Emma's diary are being distributed at the school entrance with insinuations about a relationship between you two." Thomas and Emma exchanged alarmed glances. The storm that had been slowly forming throughout the day was finally breaking over them, literally and metaphorically. "Lisa," said Thomas, almost to himself, "it can only be her." "What do we do now?" asked Emma, suddenly feeling vulnerable. Thomas straightened his shoulders, reassuming the leadership posture that characterized him. "We face the storm. Together, if you're willing." Emma hesitated for only a second before firmly nodding. 10 years ago, she had fled from feelings she didn't completely understand. Now, as an adult, she would face any challenge that came, not for a teenage passion, but for principles that really mattered. The rain fell mercilessly over New Orleans when Emma and Thomas crossed the main courtyard towards the Institute's gate. Microphones, cameras, and journalists clustered under colorful umbrellas, creating a restless mosaic of professional curiosity. The news had spread with the speed typical of the digital era. The respected literature professor, director of the Hemingway Cultural Institute, was actually an anonymous millionaire who financed the entire operation, a Professor Mitchell. Is it true that you hid your fortune for more than a decade? Why the secret about being the true owner of the Institute? Is there any connection between your revelation and the rumors about an involvement with a former student? The questions overlapped like waves breaking on the beach, some professional, others sensationalist. Emma remained slightly behind Thomas, observing how he faced the tumult with the same dignity he demonstrated in the classroom. "I'll make an official declaration." "Tomorrow morning," announced Thomas, his firm voice rising above the hubbub. "For now, I ask for respect for our educational institution. Our students don't deserve to have their learning environment disturbed." A determined-looking journalist with a New Orleans Gazette badge managed to get closer. "Professor there. Are rumors about excerpts from a romantic diary circulating in the school? Would it have any relation with Professor Carter, who was your student in the past?" The questioning provoked a new frenzy among the reporters. Emma felt her face burn, conscious of the gazes that now turned to her. Thomas remained impassive, only responding, "Lamentably, someone is trying to divert attention from truly important issues with unfounded rumors. Professor Carter is a respected professional, hired for her academic merit." When they finally managed to return to the interior of the institute, the rain had diminished to a persistent drizzle. The courtyard was deserted. The students had already departed, and most of the teachers as well. Only a few lights remained lit in the administrative areas. "That was just the beginning," commented Thomas, drying his face with a handkerchief. "Tomorrow will be worse when the newspapers publish the first articles." Emma nodded, trying to control the tremor in her hands. Lisa calculated the moment well. Everyone will associate the revelation about your fortune with the excerpts from the diary, as if there were a conspiracy being unmasked. "An effective strategy," Thomas bitterly agreed. "Discredit two people with a single blow." They walked in silence to the teacher's room, where they found Megan and 3 other colleagues in heated discussion. Upon noticing the arrival of Thomas and Emma, they all fell silent abruptly. "Please continue," said Thomas with a tired smile. "I imagine you're discussing the day's news." Megan was the first to speak up, always direct. "We were wondering if the Institute will continue functioning normally, considering everything that's happening." "It will function more normally than ever," assured Thomas. "My personal financial situation has never affected the daily operation of the school and won't start now." Paul, the math teacher, uncomfortably cleared his throat. "And what about the other rumors? About you and Professor Carter?" Emma felt all gazes turn to her. It was the moment to face the situation, as she had decided to do. Stepping forward, she responded with a clear voice. "I was a student of the Institute 10 years ago. Like many teenagers, I developed an intellectual admiration for Professor Mitchell, which I recorded in a personal diary. That diary was stolen, and its excerpts are being used to create a malicious narrative. There's nothing more to say about it." The silence that followed was broken by Megan, who smiled in solidarity. "Well, if anyone wants to know, I had a terrible crush on my chemistry teacher in high school. I even wrote horrible poems about his eyes, chemical and mysterious like solutions in ebullition." The confession provoked tense laughter, momentarily alleviating the climate. One by one, the other teachers also offered discreet support, sharing similar stories or simply expressing indignation at the invasion of privacy. "Where is Lisa?" finally asked Thomas, noting the coordinator's absence. "Left. Early?" informed Paul. "Said she wasn't feeling well." Emma and Thomas exchanged significant glances. Lisa was certainly planning her next move. Night had already fallen when they finally left the institute. The rain had stopped completely, leaving the air with that peculiar quality of freshness after a storm. The streets of New Orleans shone under the streetlights, reflecting the sky that began to clear between scattered clouds. "Can I offer a ride?" asked Thomas when they reached the almost empty parking lot. Emma hesitated for a moment. "I don't think it would be prudent, considering the rumors." "You're right," he agreed, with a resigned smile, "although it seems absurd that two adults need to worry about appearances in this way." "It's only temporary," replied Emma, "until this whole situation calms down." They said goodbye with studied formality, conscious that they might be being observed. Emma headed to the nearest taxi stand, while Thomas remained in the parking lot, watching her leave until he was sure of her safety. In her apartment in the Provence Garden District, Emma found 3 messages on her electronic secretary, all from media outlets requesting interviews. She ignored them, preparing a chamomile tea while trying to organize her thoughts. The situation had escalated vertiginously in just 24 hours, from newly hired teacher to central character of a potential scandal. Her phone rang, displaying an unknown number. She hesitated before answering, fearing another reporter, but the voice on the other end was unexpected. "Emma, this is Sarah Coleman." The name made Emma momentarily freeze. Sarah Coleman, Thomas's ex-fiancée, the university professor who had left for the United States years ago. "How did you get my number?" asked Emma, unable to disguise her surprise. "Thomas gave it to me. I hope you don't mind the direct contact, but the situation seems urgent." Emma sat down slowly. "You're in contact with Thomas. Occasionally, we're civilized adults who follow different paths." Sarah's voice was calm, professorial, without traces of antagonism. "He called me today, explaining the situation at the institute. He asked for my help regarding Lisa Greenwood." "Your help? How?" "I have information that might be relevant. When I worked at Tulane, Lisa was my colleague in an extension project. We developed a certain friendship, or at least I thought it was friendship at the time." Emma listened attentively while Sarah narrated her story. Apparently, years ago, Lisa had tried to sabotage her relationship with Thomas through subtle manipulations and distorted information. When this failed, she attempted a direct confrontation, declaring her feelings for Thomas and suggesting that Sarah get out of the way. "At the time, I decided not to mention the incident to Thomas," explained Sarah. "He trusted Lisa so much as a professional that I feared creating an unsustainable work environment for him. Perhaps it was a mistake." "Why are you telling me this now?" asked Emma, still trying to process the information. "Because I see the same pattern repeating itself. Lisa develops a fixation on Thomas, idealizes a relationship that doesn't exist, and when she perceives a potential threat, she becomes manipulative." Sarah's voice assumed a more serious tone. "But this time it's different. She's attacking publicly not just you, but the very institution that Thomas built with such care." The conversation continued for a few more minutes, with Sarah offering practical advice based on her own experience. When they hung up, Emma felt simultaneously alarmed and comforted. Alarmed by the confirmation of Lisa's methods, comforted by having an unexpected ally. The next morning, the Hemingway Cultural Institute dawned surrounded by journalists. The headlines of the main New Orleans newspapers highlighted the revelation about Thomas Mitchell, with sensationalist speculations about his motivations for maintaining anonymity. Some articles mentioned the rumors of inappropriate relationship, although without directly citing names. When Emma arrived, facing the gauntlet of reporters with silent dignity, she found the internal environment of the institute surprisingly normal. Students chatted animatedly in the hallways, some clearly excited by the sudden notoriety of their school. Teachers conducted their classes with professionalism, although exchanges of glances between colleagues betrayed the underlying tension. Her first class of the day was with the sophomore year. Upon entering the room, Emma immediately perceived the different climate. Curious glances, some disguised smiles, poorly contained whispers. Breathing deeply, she decided to address the situation directly. "Good morning, everyone. Before we begin our class on American modernism, I'd like to say a few words about the unusual situation we're experiencing." Her voice was firm, her eyes scanning each youthful face with attention. You've probably seen journalists at the entrance and read sensationalist headlines. The truth is much simpler. Professor Mitchell created this institute because he deeply believes in transformative education. He preferred anonymity so that his work would be judged on merit, not by his financial condition. The students listened with respectful attention. Emma continued, now with more confidence. "As for the other rumors you may have heard, about excerpts from a diary. Yes, I was a student of this institute 10 years ago. Like many teenagers, I kept a diary where I expressed thoughts and feelings typical of that age. Someone found that diary and is using excerpts from it to create a malicious narrative. It's lamentable, but I won't allow it to affect our dedication to the study of American literature." A reflective silence followed her words. Then, to Emma's surprise, Julie, one of the brightest students in the class, raised her hand. "Professor, most of us aren't judging anyone. Actually, we think it's incredible that Professor Mitchell created all this and chose to be a teacher instead of living as a millionaire in a mansion. And as for the diary," she hesitated, casting glances of confirmation to her colleagues. "Who hasn't written something embarrassing in adolescence? We're on your side." The words provoked murmurs of agreement around the room. Emma felt a wave of gratitude for those young people whose capacity for understanding and empathy often surprised adults. "Thank you, Julie. That means a lot." Breathing deeply, Emma resumed her professional posture. "Now, open your books to page 142. Let's discover how T.S. Eliot revolutionized American literature with his The Waste Land." The class proceeded with surprising normality, the students actively participating in the discussion about American modernism. When the bell rang, Emma felt emotionally exhausted but professionally fulfilled. In the hallway heading to the teacher's room, she was intercepted by Faith, the administrative assistant. "Professor Emma, the administrative board requests your presence in the meeting room immediately." "The board? Why?" "I don't know the details," replied Faith, seeming genuinely embarrassed. "They just asked me to locate you urgently." With a knot forming in her stomach, Emma headed to the meeting room. At the door, she found Thomas, his expression more serious than she had ever seen. "What's happening?" she asked, keeping her voice. "Close time." "Lisa convened an extraordinary board meeting," he replied, passing his hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. "She's formally questioning your hiring, alleging conflict of interest and omission of relevant information in the selection process." "What relevant information?" "Your history as a former student. The fact that you maintained a romantic interest in me, documented in your diary. Basically, she's insinuating that your hiring was the result of personal favoritism." Emma felt a wave of indignation. "That's absurd. My resume speaks for itself. I have more than sufficient qualifications for the position." "I know that," assured Thomas, "and I intend to make that very clear to the board. But I need you to understand something. Lisa isn't just attacking you. She's questioning my integrity as an educator and manager. It's a calculated strategy to force me into a voluntary withdrawal while the accusations are investigated." "She wants to assume the direction of the institute," concluded Emma, finally understanding the complete picture. "Exactly. And with my recent revelation about being the true owner, she needs to publicly discredit me for the board to consider my removal, even if temporary." The door to the meeting room opened, and one of the board members, a distinguished-looking gentleman with completely white hair, invited them to enter. Inside, around the mahogany oval table, 7 people waited, including Lisa Greenwood, impeccably dressed and with an expression of concern so well rehearsed that it almost seemed genuine. "Professor Mitchell, Professor Carter," began the board president, Dr. Augustus Warner, "we thank you for your presence at this extraordinary meeting. We're here to discuss serious accusations raised by Dr. Greenwood related to the hiring process and possible conflict of interest. Emma looked directly at Lisa, who sustained her gaze with calculated coldness. The storm they had faced the previous day was just the harbinger of the true clash that was now beginning. No longer amid raindrops and camera flashes, but in the silent room where the future of the institute would be decided. The silence in the meeting room was dense, almost palpable. Emma could feel the weight of the board members' gazes alternating between her and Thomas, while Lisa methodically organized a folder of documents on the table. The theater was set up, the positions defined. "Before we begin," said Thomas, breaking the silence, "I'd like to register my protest regarding the nature of this meeting. Questioning Professor Carter's professional competence based on rumors and excerpts from a teenage diary is at the very least inappropriate." Dr. Augustus Warner, the board president, a 70-year-old man with the dignity of a retired judge, adjusted his reading glasses. "Your objections are registered, Professor Mitchell. However, Dr. Greenwood has raised questions about the hiring process that, given your recently revealed position as the Institute's owner, merit proper scrutiny." Lisa smiled discreetly, the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I appreciate the board's understanding. I want to make it clear that my concerns are strictly professional and aim to protect the Institute's reputation." Her tone was of studied concern, like an experienced actress interpreting sincerity. "I have here documents that demonstrate that Professor Carter omitted crucial information in her application." "What information would that be?" asked Emma, keeping her voice firm despite the growing indignation. "First, you didn't mention in your resume that you were a student at the Institute, a significant omission, considering you would be working directly with your former teacher." Lisa passed a document to each board member. "Second, these excerpts from your personal diary, which unfortunately became public, reveal an inappropriate emotional involvement with Professor Mitchell since adolescence." "A teenage diary does not constitute emotional involvement," retorted Emma. "As for the supposed omission, my education at the Institute is clearly listed in my academic history, which was attached to the resume." One of the board members, a middle-aged university professor, examined the documents with a skeptical expression. "Dr. Greenwood, I still don't understand where the conflict of interest is. Many professionals return to teach at institutions where they studied. It's a common practice in the academic environment." "The conflict," replied Lisa with false didactic patience, "is in the fact that Professor Mitchell, who we now know to be the true owner of the Institute, hired someone for whom he was the object of a documented passion without revealing this previous connection to the selection committee." "That is completely false," intervened Thomas, his indignation finally visible. "Professor Carter was selected by an independent committee based exclusively on her academic qualifications. I merely ratified the decision, as I do with all teachers." Lisa raised an eyebrow in a calculated gesture of disbelief. "Really? Then why did you keep her note all these years? The one with the message, 'True love is worth the wait'?" The mention of the note provoked murmurs among the board members. Emma felt her face burn, not with shame, but with anger at the deliberate manipulation of the facts. "Gentlemen," Emma stood, refusing to remain in the position of the accused, "we are facing a deliberate attempt at decontextualization. Yes, I was a student here. Yes, like many teenagers, I developed an admiration for Professor Mitchell, which I recorded in a personal diary. That was 10 years ago. Since then, I graduated with honors from Boston University, completed a master's, published nationally recognized academic articles. I was hired for my qualifications, not for teenage feelings." Her voice gained firmness as she spoke, and she noticed that the board members were listening to her with genuine attention. "As for the note mentioned by Dr. Greenwood, it's interesting that she knows it so well, considering it was in Professor Mitchell's private possession. How did you access this information, Dr. Greenwood?" The direct question caught Lisa off guard. Her imperturbable countenance faltered momentarily. "That is irrelevant to the discussion," she tried to evade. "On the contrary," intervened Thomas, "it's absolutely relevant. Just as it's relevant to mention that Professor Carter's diary, which was kept in a locked cabinet, was mysteriously stolen and its excerpts spread throughout the school exactly when the Northeast Consortium's offer was rejected. The board members exchanged uneasy glances. The atmosphere in the room had subtly changed. The judge now seemed to be the judged. At that moment, knocks on the door interrupted the growing tension. Faith, the administrative assistant, entered with an apprehensive expression. "Sorry for the interruption, but there's someone here who insists on participating in the meeting. Says they have relevant information for the case under discussion." To everyone's surprise, especially Thomas and Emma's, Sarah Coleman entered the room, elegant as always in her grey suit, black hair impeccably tied in an austere bun. "Dr. Coleman." Dr. Augustus stood up, clearly recognizing the renowned university. "Professor, I didn't know you were back in New Orleans." "I arrived last night specifically for this meeting," replied Sarah, with the academic authority that characterized her. "I learned from colleagues at Tulane about the situation at the Institute and felt it was my professional and ethical duty to share information I possess." Lisa had visibly paled. "I don't see how Dr. Coleman could contribute to this specific discussion," she protested, trying to maintain control of the situation. "She doesn't work at the Institute and doesn't know the details of the hiring process in question." Sarah smiled with polite condescension. "Actually, Lisa, my contribution is quite relevant." Turning to the board, she continued, I was engaged to Professor Mitchell a few years ago. What you perhaps don't know is that my breakup with him was strongly influenced by Dr. Greenwood's actions." An astonished silence filled the room. Sarah removed some printed sheets from the folder she carried. "I have here emails dated 7 years ago where Dr. Greenwood systematically tried to sabotage my relationship with Thomas through distorted information and emotional manipulations. At the time, I chose not to publicly expose the situation out of respect for the Institute. Today, I see that was a mistake." While Sarah detailed the documents, Lisa seemed to physically diminish in her chair. Emma observed the scene with a mixture of shock and validation, the pieces of the puzzle finally fitting together. "But there's more," continued Sarah, pulling another document from the folder. "This is a copy of a contract signed between Lisa Greenwood and Northeast Development Consortium, dated 3 weeks ago." The murmurs among the board members increased. Dr. Augustus took the document with slightly trembling hands. "It's a consulting agreement," explained Sarah. "Dr. Greenwood would receive a substantial commission if the sale of the Institute's land materialized. A clear conflict of interest situation, considering her position as pedagogical coordinator." Lisa abruptly stood up, knocking over her chair. "This is an invasion of privacy. These documents were obtained illegally." "Actually," replied Sarah calmly, "they were voluntarily provided by Marcus Foster, representative of Northeast Consortium, who apparently had a crisis of conscience after the public revelation about the Institute's true purpose. He is waiting in the hallway should the board wish to hear his testimony." The room exploded in overlapping voices. Board members demanded explanations. Lisa tried to defend herself, while Thomas and Emma observed the unfolding of events with stupefaction. Finally, Dr. Augustus struck the table with authority, restoring order. "Dr. Greenwood, these are extremely serious accusations. If confirmed, they constitute not only a breach of trust, but potentially illegal acts against the institution." Lisa, realizing that her position was irremediably compromised, abandoned the facade of concerned coordinator. Her eyes, previously calculatedly compassionate, now shone with barely contained anger. "You don't understand. I dedicated my life to this institute, 10 years working tirelessly while he," she pointed at Thomas, "played humble teacher, hiding his fortune, manipulating all of us. And now he brings back this love-struck former student, completely ignoring my dedication, my commitment." The emotional explosion left everyone momentarily speechless. In the silence that followed, Emma stepped forward, facing Lisa directly. "It was you who stole my diary, wasn't it? And spread the excerpts throughout the school trying to discredit me?" Lisa smiled bitterly. "So brilliant, our young teacher. Yes, I found your precious diary when we were reorganizing the old archives. A fascinating read, I must say. Almost poetic in its teenage naivety." And the note? How did you know about it? Asked Thomas, his voice controlled despite the evident tension. You're not as discreet as you think, Thomas. I saw you rereading that ridiculous note so many times over the years. True love is worth the wait, she imitated with disdain. I always knew it meant something. Special to you, although I never imagined it was from her until I saw the handwriting in the diary. Dr. Augustus stood up, his expression grave like a judge pronouncing a sentence. Dr. Greenwood, in view of these revelations, the board requests your immediate departure from the room. Your situation at the Institute will be decided in a private meeting, but consider yourself suspended from your functions until further notice. For a moment, it seemed that Lisa would argue, but something in the unanimous expression of the board members made her reconsider. With forced dignity, she collected her belongings and headed for the door. Before leaving, she turned one last time. You think you're protecting some great educational institution, but it's just the personal toy of a bored millionaire who chose to play teacher to feel important. Her gaze fixed on Emma. And you, so proud of your academic achievements, you'll always be the little student in love with the teacher, no matter how many diplomas you hang on the wall. The door closed behind her with a definitive click. The silence that followed was broken by Dr. Augustus, who cleared his throat uncomfortably. Professor Mitchell, Professor Carter, on behalf of the board, I offer our most sincere apologies for this lamentable situation. It is evident that you were victims of a personal vengeance disguised as professional concern. The next 30 minutes were dedicated to completely clarifying the situation. The board, now aware of all the facts, unanimously agreed that there was no basis for questions about Emma's hiring or about Thomas's integrity as director. When they were finally dismissed, Emma, Thomas, and Sarah walked together through the silent corridors of the Institute. The school day had ended, and only the cleaning staff circulated through the building. How did you get those documents? Thomas asked Sarah, still processing the events of the meeting. Sarah smiled. When you called me yesterday mentioning Northeast Consortium, I remembered an old student who works there. One call led to another, and eventually I reached Marcus Foster, who was quite troubled by the role Lisa had convinced him to play. It was providential, commented Emma. Without your intervention, the situation could have unfolded very differently. Sometimes the universe conspires in favor of truth, replied Sarah, with an enigmatic smile. Besides, despite our relationship not having worked out, I always respected Thomas's work at this institute. I couldn't allow it to be destroyed by personal resentments. Reaching the central courtyard, Sarah checked her watch. I need to go. My flight back to the United States leaves in a few hours. Extending her hand to Emma, she added, It was a pleasure to meet you, Professor Carter. Thomas always had good taste, in literature and in people. With a quick hug to Thomas and a final wave to Emma, Sarah departed, leaving them alone under the centennial oak tree that dominated the garden. The sun was beginning to set, tinting the New Orleans sky with orange tones that reflected on the Institute's colonial walls. It seems we survived the storm, commented Thomas after a moment of contemplative silence. For now, agreed Emma. But the press is still out there, and the rumors about us two will probably continue circulating for some time. Thomas smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. You know what's fascinating? After a decade hiding who I really am, there's something strangely liberating in having my private life exposed this way, as if I could finally breathe completely. Emma nodded, understanding perfectly the feeling. It's like that phrase by Emily Dickinson, freedom is not having nothing left to lose. Maybe it has a name, replied Thomas, his gaze meeting hers with serene intensity. We just aren't ready to pronounce it yet. A month passed. The media storm gradually subsided, replaced by new scandals, new stories. The Hemingway Cultural Institute, after the initial shock, found a new equilibrium. The revelation about Thomas's true identity, far from harming the institution, attracted positive attention and new partnerships. Lisa Greenwood formally resigned from her position, thus avoiding a potentially embarrassing administrative process. Megan temporarily assumed the pedagogical coordination, bringing a renewed and collaborative energy to the school environment. It was a Friday afternoon when Emma, after her last class, found an envelope on her desk in the teacher's room. Inside, a formal invitation. Professor Emma Carter, the Hemingway Cultural Institute has the pleasure of inviting you to the inauguration ceremony of the new digital library, which will take place this Saturday at 4 p.m. in the Central Garden. Attire: elegant casual. Please confirm your attendance with Faith by Friday. Intrigued by the formality of the invitation for an internal event, Emma confirmed her attendance. On Saturday, wearing a simple but elegant dress in petrol blue, she headed to the Institute, surprised to find the main gate decorated with tropical flowers and a small group of people gathered in the Central Garden. Thomas waited under the centennial oak tree, impeccable in a white shirt and light dress pants. Upon seeing her approach, his face lit up with a smile that involuntarily made Emma's heart race. "What inauguration is this?" she asked, noting that the audience consisted only of some teachers, long-standing employees like Betty, and half a dozen students, including Julie from the sophomore year. "I didn't see any new construction happening." Thomas offered his arm, leading her to a wooden bench strategically positioned under the tree. "It's not exactly a physical library," he explained, mysteriously. "It's more a special project." Emma sat down, still confused, while Thomas took a position in front of her, with his back to the small audience that observed with complicit smiles. 10 years ago, he began, his voice projected so that all could hear, "a young student left a note on my desk before leaving. True love is worth the wait," it said. At the time, I didn't completely understand the meaning of those words, or perhaps I wasn't ready to understand. Emma felt the blush rise to her face, while those present exchanged significant glances. 10 years have passed. I built this institute, dedicated my life to education, hid who I really was behind a partial identity, and then, as in one of those novels we teach in our literature classes, destiny intervened. The author of that note returned, no longer as a student, but as an accomplished woman, a brilliant professional. Thomas knelt before her, taking a small velvet box from his pocket. "Emma Carter, in the last months we've faced together storms that would have destroyed less determined people. I discovered in you not just the girl who admired literature with youthful passion, but the woman who transformed that passion into a life purpose. I'm not asking you to fulfill a teenage promise. I'm asking you to consider an adult, conscious, mature promise." Opening the box, he revealed a delicate ring with a small sapphire. Was true love really worth the wait? Only you can answer that, but I know that I want to spend the rest of my life discovering that answer by your side. Emma, would you give me the honor of being my wife? Time seemed to suspend itself. The murmur of the oak leaves, the distant song of birds, the emotional smiles of the small audience, everything disappeared. There remained only Emma and Thomas, united by an invisible thread that time had woven between them. "Yes," she finally replied, her voice choked with emotion. True love was worth every minute of the wait. The applause and exclamations of joy from those present broke the intimate moment, bringing them back to shared reality. Thomas slid the ring onto her finger and stood up, pulling her into an embrace that sealed not just a future commitment, but the conclusion of a journey begun a decade ago. Julie, the sophomore student, approached timidly with a bouquet of tropical flowers. "Professor Emma, we're so happy for you. Some students and I pooled together to buy these flowers." Moved by the gesture, Emma hugged the young woman. "Thank you, Julie. You all are an important part of this story." The small celebration extended into the afternoon, with champagne for the adults and juice for the students present. Stories were shared, laughter echoed through the garden, and the Hemingway Cultural Institute, which had already been the stage, for so many transformations, witnessed one more, the union of two souls that destiny had insisted on bringing together. 2 years later, under the same centennial oak tree, Emma walked through the garden transformed into a natural altar. Dressed in a simple lace dress, she carried a bouquet of Louisiana wildflowers. Among the guests, she recognized familiar faces, teachers, past and current students, the community that had become her extended family. Thomas waited for her alongside, the celebrant, his eyes reflecting a mixture of admiration and gratitude that made all the path traveled worth it. At his side as maid of honor was Sarah Coleman, who had returned specially from the United States for the ceremony. When the celebrant asked if anyone had objections to the union, a collective smile ran through the audience. Everyone there knew the story, the difficulties, the unlikely path that had brought Emma and Thomas to that moment. The vows were exchanged under the murmur of the oak leaves and the song of birds that inhabited the garden. Simple, sincere promises, strengthened by the certainty that they had already overcome together more challenges than many couples face in a lifetime. As the new couple walked between applause down the improvised corridor in the garden, Emma spotted, among the guests, an unexpected figure. Lisa, Greenwood observed from a distance not as a guest, but as someone who was passing by and stopped to witness the moment. Their gazes crossed briefly. There was no longer anger or resentment, just the silent acknowledgement of a chapter closed. The reception extended into the night with music, dance, and the contagious joy typical of New Orleans celebrations. At a certain point, Emma and Thomas briefly escaped to the Institute's library, the place where everything had really begun, where a dreamy teenager wrote in her diary and a teacher silently kept a scented note. "You know what I'm thinking?" asked Thomas while they observed the party from a distance. "What?" Emma rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the familiar fragrance of his cologne mixed with the aroma of books that surrounded them. "That our story would make an excellent novel, one of those we recommend to students." Emma laughed. "Maybe. One day I'll write it. The Teacher and the Secret Millionaire. Sounds like a soap opera title." "I prefer True Love is Worth the Wait," countered Thomas, wrapping her in his arms. "More poetic, don't you think?" Under the starry New Orleans sky, while the music and laughter from the party arrived like a distant soundtrack, Emma and Thomas sealed with a kiss not just their union, but the certainty that some destinies, no matter how long they take, find their way to fulfillment. Dear listeners, we hope that Emma and Thomas's journey has touched your hearts. To continue experiencing equally moving stories, we've prepared a special playlist with American narratives that explore the complexities of love, identity, and second chances. Find it right here, clicking on the icon to your left. If this story awakened emotions in you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave your like on this video. Daily, we bring new stories that celebrate the richness of American culture.